In 1984, the Soviet Union sent a spacecraft to Venus. At that time, humanity knew almost nothing about the planet. But during that mission, the spacecraft witnessed something so disturbing that even after 42 years, countries like NASA, Russia, China, and India still hesitate to go back. So the question is, what exactly did the Soviets see on Venus? In 1969, humans first set foot on the moon. Since then, scientists have sent missions to Mars, Saturn, and even the moons of Jupiter multiple times. Space exploration kept moving forward, pushing deeper into the unknown. Yet somehow Venus, a planet so close to Earth, remains almost untouched. Why? Elon Musk, a visionary person like him, is thinking about building human colonies on Mars. But have you ever thought about this? Venus is very close to Earth and almost the same size as our planet. So why has no one ever talked about building a colony there? Forget colonization, no one even wants to send spacecraft to Venus. Why is that? What mystery is hidden on Venus? The answer lies in a Soviet Union mission from 42 years ago. In that mission, something happened that shocked scientists. Even today, some images from that mission still can't be explained. So I am here with you, by popular demand. I have brought another space science-related video for Wikipedia. Through this video, you will understand how the brightest object in the eastern sky in the morning and evening, known as the morning star, is actually Venus, and how mysterious and terrifying it really is. But to watch this video, you don't need any science background. No need to be an expert, because I will explain everything in a very simple way. This video will be very interesting. So make sure you watch till the end. And don't forget to like the video at the beginning. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union got involved in the Cold War. This Cold War also extended into space science and technology. These two superpowers wanted rapid progress in science, so they could establish their dominance around the world. In the early stage of this space race, the Soviets were far ahead. They launched the first artificial satellite into space called Sputnik 1. After that, the Soviet Union also sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. They even became the first to send a probe to the moon called Luna 2. After that, the Soviet Union's next target was Venus, the closest planet to Earth. In the solar system, Venus is the closest planet to Earth, at a distance of about 27 million kilometers. Interestingly, Venus has many similarities with Earth in terms of structure. For example, the total size of Venus is about 95% of Earth's size. That means both planets are almost similar in size. Even in terms of mass, the two planets are quite similar. In addition, like Earth, Venus also has a thick atmosphere surrounding it. Because of all these similarities between the two planets, Venus and Earth are often called twin sisters or twin planets. Because of these similarities, scientists at that time believed that Venus might even have life. And if any space agency discovered life outside Earth, it would become a huge milestone in human history. That is why the Soviet Union started a special mission for Venus called the Venera program. But a problem quickly appeared. When scientists tried to observe Venus through telescopes, they noticed that the planet is covered with a very thick layer of atmosphere. This layer is so dense that the surface of Venus cannot be seen through telescopes. Meanwhile, in 1960, American astronomer Carl Sagan published a research paper about Venus. In that paper, he clearly stated that the thick cloud layer surrounding Venus is actually made of greenhouse gases. Because of these greenhouse gases, the temperature on Venus is much higher than on Earth. Also, Venus is much closer to the Sun compared to Earth. So scientists believe that due to these greenhouse gases and its closeness to the Sun, the temperature on Venus would be extremely high. At such temperatures, no form of life could survive. Even if any living organism from Earth were taken to Venus, it would burn to ashes within moments. Scientists at that time accepted Carl Sagan's theory. Because of this, most space agencies did not show much interest in Venus. But the Soviet Union, meaning Russia, took it as a challenge. They decided that no matter what, they would explore Venus. With this goal, in 1961, the Soviets created 2 probes to send to Venus, and the mission was named Venera 1. Now you might be wondering why 2 probes were made doubs. Why were the probes created? At that time, space technology was not as advanced as it is today. In fact, the smartphone you are holding now has thousands of times more computing power than the computers used to send humans to the moon. Because of this limitation, whenever a space mission was launched, a backup mission was also prepared. So if one failed, the other could still continue the mission. On February 12, 1961, the Soviet Union launched these two probes using their 7 ballistic missile rocket. The probes reached very close to Venus. They round 100,000 kilometers away. But as they moved closer to the Sun, the intense heat started damaging their sensors. As a result, the probes could no longer turn back toward Earth. Even the timers inside them stopped working. On February 17, both probes sent their last signal to Earth. After that, all communication was completely lost, and the probes disappeared into deep space. And with that, Venera 1 failed. But the Soviets didn't give up. They started preparing for another Venera mission. Meanwhile, NASA, following the Soviets, launched its own probe called Mariner 2, which passed Venus at a distance of about 35,000 kilometers. This was the first time in history that a spacecraft got so close to another planet. NASA's Mariner 2 spent around 42 minutes collecting data about Venus's atmosphere. And the information it sent back was the most shocking. The data proved that Carl Sagan's greenhouse effect theory was completely correct. It was estimated that the surface temperature of Venus is around 237 degrees Celsius, which is almost twice the temperature of boiling water. At such extreme temperatures, no form of life could survive. But Mariner 2 revealed another shocking fact. The atmosphere around Venus has a very thick and dense layer of clouds, rising up to about 80 kilometers above the surface. To explain it simply, the cloud layer is so thick that it's like having a dense blanket of clouds stretching all the way from Earth's surface to space. And because of this thick cloud layer, Mariner 2 could not provide any information about the surface of Venus. From this, NASA clearly understood one thing: there is no possibility of life on Venus. Because of this, they shifted their focus away from Venus and moved toward the Moon and Mars. But on the other hand, the Soviets did not give up. They believed they were very close to a huge discovery. For years they built to more powerful and larger spacecraft. Then in 1965, they launched another probe called Venera 2. This probe was much more advanced than the previous one. It weighed about 963 kilograms. It was equipped with instruments like cosmic ray detectors, a magnetometer and a Geiger counter. With all these instruments, as it passed by Venus, it was expected to collect much more detailed data. At that time, it would store all the data about the planet Venus in its internal memory and immediately transmit back to Earth. In 1966, shortly after the launch of Venera 2, it reached as close as 24,000 kilometers from Venus. According to scientists' expectations, it was only about 38 minutes away from reaching the planet. But at that very moment, the probe malfunctioned. As a result, the Venera mission failed once again. But the question is, why did this mission fail? After investigation, scientists discovered that the thermal coating placed on the outside of the Venera 2 probe was damaged due to the sun's intense heat. That heat then penetrated inside the probe and damaged all of its internal instruments. From this failure, they clearly understood one thing: if they wanted to send more probes in the future, they would need to focus mainly on improving heat protection mechanisms. And after this realization, the Soviets began their Venera 3 mission. On November 16, 1965, the Soviets launched their Venera 3 mission. In the beginning, everything in this mission was progressing smoothly. Then in March 1966, for the first time ever, a probe sent by humans from Earth entered the atmosphere of another planet. The probe crashed onto the surface of Venus about 4 minutes earlier than its scheduled time. However, no data was received after that. Scientists assumed that the extreme pressure and heat of Venus destroyed all the internal instruments of the probe. As a result, like the previous two missions, Venera 3 also failed. Even after this, the Soviets did not give up. There were more reasons behind their determination. By that time, NASA had moved far ahead in the space race and had already begun preparations to send humans to the Moon. So, the Soviets needed to achieve something that would prove themselves to the entire world. To maintain their dominance, the Soviet Union developed their next mission, Venera 4. The main spacecraft of Venera 4 was about 3.5 meters tall. At its front, there was a metallic sphere. Known as the landing capsule, it was designed in such a way that it could withstand temperatures of up to 400 degrees Celsius. In addition, it could pressure up to 25 atmospheres. To give you an idea, the air around us right now creates a pressure of about 1 atmosphere on our bodies. In comparison, this probe was built to nearly 25 times that pressure. Moreover, the internal temperature of the capsule was maintained at -4 degrees Celsius. so that even if the external temperature became extremely high, the instruments inside would remain protected. In 1967, scientists launched this probe when it was at an altitude of about 52 kilometers above the surface of Venus. The surrounding air temperature was around 33 degrees Celsius, and the atmospheric pressure was quite similar to that of Earth. The environment there initially seemed almost identical to Earth. But strangely, as the capsule descended closer to the surface of Venus, the temperature started rising dramatically. After descending just 26 kilometers, the temperature shot up to 262 degrees Celsius, and the atmospheric pressure increased to 22 atmospheres. At this point, the capsule lost its functionality. Long before reaching the surface, the intense pressure of the atmosphere crushed the capsule. In scientific terms, this is called an implosion. Once again, the Soviets failed. And through this, you can understand just how extreme and dangerous the planet Venus really is. At the same time, alongside the Soviets, the American Space Agency NASA was also continuing its Mariner missions. When the Soviet probe Venera entered the atmosphere of Venus, Mariner 5 was only about 4,000 kilometers away from Venera 4.
Mariner 5 collected a huge amount of data from Venus and sent it back to Earth. When scientists combined the information from both probes, they discovered some truly terrifying facts about the planet's environment. They found that the atmospheric pressure on Venus is around 90 atmospheres. To make that easier to understand, imagine placing an object 1 kilometer deep under the ocean. The massive weight of the water above it would create the same amount of pressure. That's the kind of extreme pressure that exists on the surface of Venus. And it's not just the pressure. The temperature there reaches nearly 480 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. Scientists also discovered that Venus's atmosphere is filled with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and toxic sulfuric acid gases. Oxygen makes up less than 1% of the atmosphere. There is less than 1% oxygen in its atmosphere. So, even though the beautiful evening star we see shining in the sky may look heavenly, Venus is actually much closer to hell. But even after these shocking reports, the Soviets did not stop. They once again prepared to send 2 more probes to Venus, Venera 5 and Venera 6. The landers of these probes were made much stronger so they would not be damaged during landing. The parachutes attached to them were also made smaller to reduce friction within Venus's atmosphere. Less friction meant slightly lower temperatures during descent. On May 16, 1969, Venera 5 entered the atmosphere of Venus and continuously transmitted data for 53 minutes. However, it still could not reach the planet's surface. Before getting there, the probe melted under the planet's extreme heat and pressure. Almost the same thing happened to Venera 6. The probe was crushed just 11 kilometers before reaching the surface of Venus. At that point, the Soviets kept getting stuck at the same stage over and over again. And after so many failures, the image of the Soviet Space Agency was also starting to suffer. Meanwhile, in 1969, NASA successfully sent humans to the moon. As a result, Soviet scientists came under even greater pressure to make the Venera mission successful. After a great deal of research and discussion, the scientists realized that the only technology capable of withstanding pressure as extreme as the deep ocean was submarine technology. This time, they decided to introduce submarine-style engineering into the Venera mission. A new probe called Venera 7 was developed, featuring a massive, egg-shaped titanium capsule weighing around 490 kilograms. It was designed in such a way that the capsule could withstand pressures of up to 180 atmospheres and temperatures as high as 540 degrees Celsius. The lander was also equipped with an automatic thermal protection system. As soon as the probe entered the atmosphere of Venus, the system would lower the internal temperature of the capsule to -8 degrees Celsius. In 1970, the Venera 7 spacecraft began its journey toward Venus. According to the scientists' plan, the probe successfully entered the atmosphere of Venus. But shortly after entry, disaster struck. All of the spacecraft's communication channels failed, except for one. Fortunately, the lander itself was still functioning properly at that point. About 60 kilometers before reaching the surface, the probe's parachute deployed and the capsule began descending. However, when the probe was only 10 kilometers above the surface, the parachute tore apart. The capsule then slammed into the surface of Venus at a speed of nearly 60 kilometers per hour. When the probe crash-landed, it fell onto its side, but even then, the probe's medium-gain antenna continued to function. Even though the signal was extremely weak, the probe was still able to communicate with Earth from the surface of Venus for 23 minutes. Venera 7 became the first human-made object to touch the surface of another planet and successfully send data back to Earth. The information sent by the probe revealed that Venus had no soil at all. Its surface was completely covered with solid rock. This proved that scientists' long-held belief that there might be water somewhere on Venus was wrong. However, the partial success of Venera 7 motivated the Soviet Union even more. After that, they became determined to learn what the surface of Venus actually looked like. They didn't just want information anymore, they wanted photographs of the planet's surface as well. At this point, you might be wondering, in an environment hot enough to melt lead, and with pressure powerful enough to crush spacecraft, how could a camera lens possibly survive and function there? Basically, the Soviet Space Agency managed to achieve something that nobody had ever imagined possible. It's important to understand that every Venera mission was interconnected. Scientists used the failures of one mission to improve the next one. In this way, they launched a total of around 16 missions. The Soviets' next target was the Venera 8 mission. It was launched in 1972. The technology was fairly similar to Venera 7. But this time, the parachute system was improved, reducing the probe's landing speed from 60 kilometers per hour to about 25 kilometers per hour. In addition, the capsule was equipped with a refrigeration unit using lithium nitrate blocks as part of its heat control system, allowing the internal temperature to remain under control for a longer period of time. From Venera 7, scientists had already learned that the surface of Venus was covered with solid rock. But Venera 8 revealed that those rocks were actually basalt. Basalt forms when volcanic lava cools and hardens. The composition of these rocks was found to be very similar to the basalt found on Earth, proving that the structures of Earth and Venus are remarkably alike. For a long time, scientists believed that because Venus is covered by a thick layer of clouds, sunlight probably could not reach the planet's surface. But Venera 8 discovered that sunlight was actually able to penetrate the atmosphere and reach the surface of Venus. The data sent by Venera 8 made Soviet scientists even more eager to capture actual images of Venus's surface. As a result, they began preparing for their next mission, Venera 9. And Venera 9 achieved something that no one had ever imagined possible before. Venera 9 became the first mission to send a black and white image of the surface of Venus back to Earth. Now let's talk about how that incredible image was captured and transmitted. The spacecraft used in the Venera 9 mission did not carry only a lander capsule. It also included an artificial satellite, or orbiter. The job of this satellite was to circle around Venus and relay the signals received from the lander back to Earth. At the same time, the orbiter continued traveling around the planet, collecting more important information about Venus's atmosphere. It's worth mentioning that this was the very first human-made satellite ever sent to Venus. The Venera 9 lander was equipped with a camera lens. Because of this, scientists greatly reduced the speed of the lander during its descent. They wanted to make sure that excessive friction with the atmosphere would not damage the camera under any circumstances. Basically, this lander had to pass through a sulfuric acid cloud layer nearly 12 miles thick. And that wasn't the only challenge. The wind speeds during descent were more than 360 kilometers per hour. Just think about it. On Earth, powerful tornadoes usually reach speeds of around 200 to 300 kilometers per hour. So you can imagine how incredibly difficult it was to land a probe in such extreme conditions. What's even more unbelievable is that near the surface of Venus, the atmosphere is so dense that the lander was able to descend almost like a floating ball, even without relying heavily on a parachute. On October 22, 1975, the lander touched down in a steep mountainous region of Venus known as Beta Regio. During landing, the probe's shock-absorbing landing gear was badly crushed and twisted from the impact. Although the lander ended up tilted on its side, thankfully one of its two camera lens caps opened successfully. The lander then began taking photographs of the surface of Venus for nearly 30 minutes. It captured images at an angle of 124 degrees and transmitted them back to Earth. Since the lander had fallen, tilted to one side at an angle of around 20 degrees, the lower right portion of the images appeared blurry. Even so, it was still able to photograph the surface up to a distance of nearly 100 meters. These became the very first images ever taken from the surface of another planet. And from the picture you're seeing, it's clear that the landscape was covered with rocks of different sizes. At first glance, it almost looks like an ordinary rocky mountain area on Earth during a late afternoon. Just imagine this for a moment. In 1975, a human-made machine standing on a blazing, furnace-like planet nearly 30 million kilometers away from Earth was sending photographs back home. What could possibly be more astonishing or inspiring than that? Only 6 days after launching Venera 9, the Soviets launched another mission called Venera 10. You could think of it as an extended version of the Venera 9 mission. During the Soviets launched another mission called Venera 10. You could think of it as an extended version of the Venera 9 mission. During the previous mission, one of the camera lenses had failed, which made it impossible to capture a complete panoramic image of Venus. That's why the main goal of Venera 10 was to take a full panoramic photograph of the planet's surface. Despite the same extreme heat and crushing atmospheric pressure, Venera 10 managed to survive on the surface of Venus for nearly 65 minutes. Not only that, but it also successfully captured and transmitted a panoramic image of the planet back to Earth. However, the images were still quite blurry. The quality of those pictures was only around 64 kilopixels. To put that into perspective, even modern smartphones today commonly have 48 megapixel cameras. That means the cameras in our phones can capture nearly 750 times more image data than the photographs that were sent from Venus back then. Basically, the fact that scientists were able to capture images in such an extreme environment was itself an incredible achievement. The Soviets later launched 2 more missions, Venera 11 and Venera 12. However, those missions did not achieve major success. Even so, the Soviet Union was not ready to give up. Using their best designs and most advanced technology, they developed and launched the Venera 13 and Venera 14 missions. Venera 13 was launched on October 30, 1981, and Venera 14 followed just 5 days later. These probes were equipped with an air-braking system to improve their descent and landing capabilities. Its job was to slow down the lander as it descended toward the surface, allowing it to land smoothly and safely without being damaged. In addition, the probes were equipped with a color camera for taking photographs, a microphone to record the sounds of Venus, a drilling machine to collect soil samples, and a seismometer to measure seismic activity. With all of this advanced equipment on board, Venera 13 survived on the surface of Venus for an astonishing 127 minutes. And it didn't just survive, it transmitted a massive amount of information back to Earth. The data included the first color images of Venus, audio recordings from the planet, soil samples, and detailed chemical analyses. For the very first time, people on Earth were able to hear the sounds of another planet. The noise coming from Venus sounded like the roaring of violent winds, as if everything around was being torn apart and crushed. The intensity of the wind was so terrifying that it almost felt unreal. If you listen to it carefully, it almost feels enough to make your ears ring, which is completely understandable. As we mentioned earlier, the wind speeds on Venus are even more intense than the speed of a tornado on Earth. However, after examining one of the images sent by Venera 13, Soviet scientist Leonid Kaysan-Fomalidi claimed that there appeared to be scorpion-like creatures moving on the surface of Venus. But if you look closely at the image, you can clearly notice a disk, a dark flap, and an object that only vaguely resembles a scorpion. Even though Leonid made that claim, it was extremely difficult for the scientific community to accept it. And the reason is obvious. Venus has unbelievably extreme conditions. The planet's temperature is incredibly high, and its atmosphere is filled with sulfuric acid and carbon dioxide. Under such conditions, it's almost impossible for complex life forms to survive. In reality, the scorpion-like object was most likely nothing more than a lens cap that had fallen off the lander. Under the intense heat of Venus, it became distorted and melted into a shape that only appeared to resemble a living creature. Later, Soviet scientists sent 2 more artificial satellites into the orbit of Venus, Venera 15 and Venera 16. And with that, the legendary Venera program finally came to an end. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. By that time, scientists had already gathered so much information about Venus that they became almost certain of one thing both now and in the future. The chances of life surviving on Venus are extremely low. And that is one of the main reasons why, even after more than 42 years, space agencies have shown very little interest in sending new crewed missions to Venus.
Now, let me ask you something. Did you already know these incredible facts about the bright evening star that we see shining in the sky every morning and evening? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments section. Today, NASA is conducting research in the deep oceans, and if these experiments become successful, there is a possibility that signs of life could one day be discovered on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. If you want to learn more about this topic in detail, make sure to watch this video. And if you'd like to see more space science videos like this, let us know in the comments section. We'll definitely try to create more content like this in the future. Until the next video, stay safe, stay healthy, and this was Yua, signing off with you.